Hey everyone, welcome back to the Friday Five. The Friday Five is every Friday at 11. I was a little delayed today because I was trying to figure out how to both share a picture with you and talk at the same time, which I figured out. So sorry to be late, and we missed last week because we had some illness in my household, but we are back, and I'm excited to talk with you about our Friday Five. So this week I'm talking through, and every week I talk through one Montessori toy, one non Montessori toy, a practical life idea, a book, and I answer a parenting question that I find on the internet. So to start us off, if you're new to the Friday Five, one of the ways that I differentiate between a Montessori toy and a non Montessori toy is whether or not the ideas around aligning ourselves and the child's environment to the child's development was sort of embedded in the activity or the toy or the material that we're presenting to the child. So if we're giving the child a toy, were ideas around the child's development part and embedded in the development of that thing? Or is it sort of after the fact we're trying to think, how could this be developmentally appropriate? So Montessori is a super simple, applicable, adaptable method where we say, what is going on with the development of the child? Then we observe the child to try to see that development in them. And then we create a space that will hopefully allow the child to do the development that they're trying to do. That's the Montessori method. And that's what we mean when we say Montessori education. So there is a curriculum, particularly in the sort of 3+ age range. There is a very specific Montessori curriculum, and a lot of those would be seen as this is part of that curriculum or it's not part of the curriculum. So there's some questions around, those being Montessori materials, and some things are not. But the basic premise, even in the curriculum, is that it came from the child's development first, and that's what led to the design of the material. And then the material was put into the hands of children, and we used our observation skills to refine that material. That's the way that curriculum was designed. And so when I talk about a Montessori toy versus a non-Montessori toy, I'm not going to be saying, okay, this is wood, so therefore it's Montessori, and this one's not wood, and so therefore it's not. That's what you might find on the internet in terms of what to look for in terms of a Montessori toy. But that's not what we're going to talk about. So I did figure out how to side share the kind of images that I'm thinking of, which I'm really happy about. And today we're going to talk about a xylophone. So, firstly, to highlight that music is such an important part of a lot of human cultures. It's an important part of human society, and it's a really wonderful thing to provide for children. Either music that we're providing by making rhythms, or in our sort of tone and the way that we can sing things can be really helpful to building songs and having them be able to start predicting language. It can be really wonderful for their own sort of tuning into their ear, and to be able to develop their ear towards different sounds and different pitches. And then also, it's got this really lovely feedback loop between the child's engagement and then the response that they get in the environment, that yes, they're engaging. So sometimes we use auditory signals in Montessori to allow the child to be able to interact with the environment and then get that kind of auditory skill or auditory feedback to sort of say, hey, you got close to that rattle because you could hear it actually making a sound, or you kicked the ball and you could hear that because there was a bell that rung. So we use auditory feedback in Montessori because it's so helpful for the child to be able to get information about their world, and we try to use harmonious sound and music to incorporate the child into the culture of the family, to incorporate the child into other cultures, and sort of to celebrate the really wonderful music that comes from cultures from around the world. And we can do that with showing the child and having the child be exposed to musical instruments. So whereas a bell is going to ring at one particular pitch and that's it. And something like a xylophone that we're going to talk about today, depending on where they're tapping the bars, it's going to have a slightly different sound, which is going to attract different kinds of movements for the child, that they're maybe wanting to select the lower pitches than the higher ones. So we're going to talk about a Montessori version and a non-Montessori version. And again, the Montessori quality that I'm talking about is whether or not the way it was designed was inherently consistent with the child's development as opposed to an afterthought. And some musical instruments, I will say as a caveat, because music is cultural, some musical instruments are designed because that's the way that they are designed. So they weren't designed specifically for children. They're designed because of a cultural approach to the creation of that instrument. And so you might sort of say, okay, this wasn't really designed for kids, but I'm going to have my child use this instrument in its exact the way that it looks, because I want to honor the cultural the genesis of this instrument. And other instruments, you might sort of say, oh, well, I am going to look for the adaptation for a child so that it can be really well used at the beginning. And to see, just like we would in the home, yes, we're not going to dimension the entire home to be at the child's level. So we might adapt the home by having a step stool so that they can reach the counter height, even though culturally for the family, we all use this one particular heighted sink. And that's what we're going to use. And we will adapt the environment to allow the child to access it. It's the same kind of idea, is that either we're going to adapt the instrument or we're just showing them a cultural material. And then we have to be mindful of where it might be misaligned to their development, or that they might, hurt the instrument or hurt themselves, in which case we have to be more mindful about how they interact with it than an instrument that was designed specifically for children. So either way, I would say that if you're honoring the cultural sort of history of that music, that's amazing. And that would be a really great reason to have a non-Montessori toy in the environment. I absolutely would have that kind of material in my environment, because it is honoring the culture of the creation of that instrument. And we're going to talk about what it would look like to actually think about the design of it for the use of children. So let's take a look. And this is where I figured out how to do these fun little things. So what we have on the left, I'm going to talk about why that's a Montessori toy, and the one on the right is not. So we have two xylophones, and the first one, the one with the child playing with it, I wanted you to notice that there's a few things that are going on. Number one, it's encased, right? So sometimes it's called a glockenspiel, but it's encased. And part of that casing is going to help the whole material be its own material, where you're not actually touching the bars. If you've ever been a teacher, or if you've ever been around instruments that children are using, oftentimes it's the xylophone that gets quite loose. And depending on how loose it gets, it can sometimes affect the sound. So having it encased can be really helpful in terms of having it designed for children to be manipulating it, where they're not going to affect the outcome of the sound that they're hearing. The other thing, and I'm going to make this bigger because I feel like I can get kind of fancy here, is that I want to make note of the mallet. So the mallet is the implement that the child is going to use to make sound on either one of these instruments. And if you can see, the mallet on the left has a circular holder at the back. And if you can see, maybe I'll make it even bigger, you can see that it has a flat tip on the end of the mallet on the left, whereas the mallet on the right, these are pretty standard drumsticks, or these are pretty standard mallets with a circular top. They are very long, and they have a blunt tip, or it just sort of ends. There's not a part. Whereas the one on the left, there's a circular part on one side, and there is the flat part on the other. So if you imagine trying to give a xylophone to a child who's pictured that age, roughly about 6 months, That is a child who is mouthing everything. That is a child who is putting things in their mouth. If they put the mallet from the from the right into their mouth, they're probably going to gag themselves. And the back of that mallet can scrape the back of their throat. They're not going to be terribly injured, but it's going to be uncomfortable. And it might require more monitoring of the child to use that. Whereas the mallet on the left is specifically designed for an infant to be able to use, or a young child who might be mouthy, because they can't, it's too big on either side that they can't actually poke the back of their throat. They can't gag themselves, and it's soft enough that it's not going to actually scrape their mouth. So this mallet was specifically designed for a child to use it, which allows the child to be that much more successful with the instrument. Whereas the one on the right, we might be inclined to not introduce this instrument until the child is in toddlerhood, until the child is older, because of these issues. But now we have a sort of a gap in opportunity for the child to be able to play musical instruments. So the last thing I would say about some of the difference between these two, and how the left is a lot more developmentally aligned, the one where the child is holding on to the mallet, that the child pictured one, is that the way that this instrument, this particular one, is designed is because it is encased. If you look at the back of this instrument, there's an actual place for the mallet to live. So it can click in and click out of this little holder at the very back. The some more standard xylophone has no place for those the mallets to exist. They are loose and they're meant to be adjacent to or with the xylophone. However, if we know anything about babies and early toddlers, is things are more likely to get disjointed. And it becomes hard for them to actually engage with the musical instrument, because if I tap on it with my fingers, I get a very dull sound. That's not terribly interesting, right? That's the whole idea with the mallet, is that it's making a different kind of sound when you strike it with this special tool. So for a child who, again, is around 6 to 12 months, there's a couple of things that make the mallet position, being at the back of this as a storage place, really, really developmentally aligned. For one, the child between around 8 to 10 months is experiencing what we call object permanence. So before that period of time, when an object goes missing, they do not know that it's gone missing. They just think that it never existed. So they don't have permanence in their mind of objects. Whereas somewhere between 8 to 10 months, they actually develop the mental awareness that things that have gone missing, things that are hidden, are actually still there. And so that's why you see the child playing peekaboo. That's why you see separation anxiety. They can become keenly aware that you are around somewhere, even if they can't see you. They start looking for things in boxes. They're very interested in finding things that have been hidden for a little bit. And so this is going to engage a child in the sequence of the steps that would that are needed to play this kind of instrument. Because if it's housed at the back of the instrument and the child starts to play with it and they get an understanding that that's where they find it, it becomes very interesting for them to turn it over, try to get the mallet out, turn it back over, and play it. So now the child is playing with all the different steps of the sequencing, and they're able to do that on their own. It also helps us keep track of that mallet, because we can make sure that it actually stays clicked in. Whereas the other one, you'd have to put it in a basket and make sure those mallets are there. And it's harder to keep track of those particular items, especially if we're thinking about a child between 6 and 12 months that would be using this. So that's some of the reasons why I would say that this sort of glockenspiel or xylophone is to the left is a much more Montessori aligned toy. even though it's made of plastic and the one on the right is made of wood, because it's designed to allow a child who's much younger to be able to freely engage with this kind of musical instrument, whereas the other one has not been adapted and therefore is often not well suited for the very young child because it hasn't been adapted downward to a younger age. So they have less access to it. So that's our Montessori toy, non-Montessori toy. We talked a bit about object permanence. We talked about the child being able to access the mallet themselves to do sequencing. We talked about how the fact that the mallet is missing for a very little bit, and then they get to go find it, and how interesting that is for them at this particular age and time. And we talked about the ability that they have to engage in musical instruments earlier when they are adapted to the child's development. So that is our Montessori and non-Montessori toy of the week. Let's take a look at our practical life. So practical life. So this practical life, the sort of genre of materials, the area in Montessori classrooms, this is talking about daily living skills. So this isn't something that you think, you find something on the web or you see something on Pinterest and then you decide to impose that on your child. Practical life is about what needs to happen in your home every day. What are you doing already every single day for the child, for the family? What are those daily living things that you need to do? And how do we allow the child to start to participate in them? And the one that we're talking about today is pouring water. So this is a child who's about 15 months, and there's a couple of things that you might notice about this activity. Number one, this child has a glass that actually fits their hands. So oftentimes what you see is children are given cups that are far too big for their hands, but because they have a lid on them, like a sippy cup or a strawed cup or a water bottle, we're able to give them a significant amount of water. If they tip it over, it doesn't spill, it's fine, and then we don't have to refill it. So that's why those containers are larger, is because we can give them much more water without having to refill it. And we're going to save ourselves the hassle of cleaning up the giant mess because we've put a lid on it. So if we back up and we sort of say, okay, well, what is the sort of Montessori approach to this? Is we have to start with the development and then work our way to the space. Well, we know that the child wants to be independent and we know that they're physically capable of it, right? So 15 months, this is a child, this particular child's walking, and they have the capacity to hold something and bring it to their mouth. They have that physical capacity. If they didn't have that physical capacity, then I wouldn't be giving them this kind of activity. But they do. They can hold something and bring it to their mouth. Are they particularly good at it? Probably not perfect, but they're getting better every day. The more they practice, the better at it they get. So they have their cup. And so then we sort of say, okay, they have the capacity. We could give them a large cup, but then we have a large spill. And are they capable of cleaning up like a giant spill? Or do I think that at 15 months, that would be pretty overwhelming for them? And because I know developmentally, they're in a stage of really asserting their independence. They really want us to back off and they want to do things themselves. So if they have a spill that is way too big for them, they're going to have to rely on us, and they're not going to be as excited about cleaning that up because it's overwhelming, just like it would be for us. I'm channeling like a giant bin of Legos that gets spilled all over the floor. That would be overwhelming for me. I would feel a little overwhelmed by having that big of a spill. So then we sort of say, all right, we could put a lid on to prevent the child from spilling. But the problem there is that they don't have the access to get themselves their own water, which is something that they're probably going to want to do. That's the refilling we're trying to avoid by giving them a larger quantity. But we could also just give them a cup that's much smaller. Don't put a lid on it so that whatever water goes in there, if it tips over and spills, it's a manageable amount to clean up for them. And if you pair that with a small pitcher that is about the same size as the cup, then the child can actually start to pour themselves more water when they need it. And that can be a really fun activity for the child. You can see that the child has spilled a little bit on the table. And so it is really helpful if you introduce any kind of water-based activity, that you also pair that with a sponge, that they know where a sponge could go if that's how you clean up those kinds of spills. Or is it a cloth, or is it a paper towel, or whatever is normal in your home? How would you deal with water on the table? You would want to make materials that are accessible to the child, that are dimensioned to their body. So if you use a sponge to clean up spills, a large adult size sponge is really big for their hands. So you could cut it in half. And that would be a much more manageable sponge size for a child's hand. And if you have sponges, where are you going to store them that the child can access? So when you give the child something like this, they can try to pour it. You can show them how to pour it if you'd like. I would just show them once, and then let them experiment to try to figure out how to do it. Let them drink their water and then comment, "Oh, the table's wet. Do you know where the sponges are? I'll show you." And you go get a sponge. And again, you're there to show them what it looks like to sponge up. But then they can have a sponge to have a turn, or you can do a little bit for you and you do it for them. The last thing about practical life is the cleanup. So, what does it look like to be done with these materials? That's the last thing to think about with practical life, is that what do I do if my sponge is soaking wet? Well, where do I put it? I probably don't put it back where I got it from, because those sponges presumably are not soaking wet. Is there a place where they can put the soaking wet sponge? Or are they expected to rinse out the sponge and then squeeze it out and return it? So think about, what do you do with the sponge? So if you use a sponge to clean up water on the table, you wipe something down, what do you do with it? Do you take it to the sink and rinse it out? Well, if that's what you do, then that's what we want to invite the child to be able to participate in. Or you can come up with a system that's more adaptive to them. But either way, you're introducing them to the daily living skills that are relevant in your household, so that they actually build practical skills and self-confidence in knowing how to deal with things when they spill, or when they make a mistake. And then, of course, they can put the pitcher down and you can refill the pitcher, and then they can refill their cup if they're interested. If they are just pouring water on the table because that's interesting to them, that would be a great time to redirect them to sort of say, "You seem to be really interested in pouring water," and have an activity, or consider setting up something where they have the ability to do some water-based play where it's not actually at the table where they're pouring it on the table. So you can set some boundaries around that, but that tends to be a good redirection. Sounds like you really want to pour. Here, why don't we go outside? Or why don't we go do this? Or why don't, let's clean this up. And, it's a time for bath anyway. Whatever it is that you can affirm that that's what you're seeing. They're not trying to misbehave. They're just moving on, and they're using the wrong materials for what they're trying to do. So using a small pitcher, using a small open cup for the child, and then having a sponge available for the child to be able to clean up, and having a very clear sense of, what is cleanup going to look like for this activity? Where are they supposed to put the sponge? Where should they put the pitcher? And where should they put the cup when they're done with it? And that is our practical life of the week. Our next one, let's see if I have it, is our book. So this is one of my favorite books. It's called Freedom We Sing, and it's got really beautiful illustrations, and it's got a lovely cadence to it. It's very poetic. And one of the things that I really love about this book is not only the sort of message that it's talking about, but also between each of the pages, it has sort of an inhale, exhale page. And it's a gorgeous illustration in the middle, where on one side, the left-hand page, says breathe in. And then the right-hand page has breathe out. And they have these really beautiful illustrations of breathing in, breathing out, or inhale, exhale. And it's throughout this very beautiful poetic story that you pause with your child and breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And it's such a lovely, they don't talk about it. It's not sort of a big part of the story, but it's almost modeling a way of being that we do this work, we show up for our child, we show up for our partners if we have one, we show up for community, we're doing the daily work it is, and the life that we lead, and we breathe in, we breathe out, and we can model that to our child, that that is part of accessing a more liberated self, is finding our own calm, finding our own peace, and modeling that to the child. So Freedom We Sing is a lovely, lovely, lovely book. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, absolutely gorgeous illustrations and this really lovely poetic cadence with the breathing in and breathing out that I just love in this book. So that's our book for the week, Freedom We Sing. Absolutely love it. Recommend you check it out. And I also, as somebody who has published a book, and I just say it's so helpful to write a review, to like somebody on social media, to support them. Those are really free ways that you can support artists, illustrators, authors, and support their work. Share it on your social media if you end up getting a book or finding it at the library, sharing the review and then also sharing it beyond your family. So really love to support children's authors. They're amazing and they're doing some really great work to provide amazing literature for children that as an educator, I very much appreciate. So all right, so we're almost at the end of our Friday Five. We got started a little bit late, but we're there. And our last one is going to be a parent question. So this is where I take us off the slides because I am learning all these really helpful things. And I am going to pull up my parent question. So let's see. Okay. So this is where you have to bear with me. I hope you join me live. I hope you put your questions in the chat when I don't have anyone posting in the chat. Then of course I'm going to find my parent questions directly from the internet, which is what I am trying to do now. If some of you have been following, I got booted from Facebook. My account was hacked and then I had to redo Facebook. So I'm not in as many of the groups as I used to be in, which has been really challenging. However, I'm still in some of the groups and I'm excited to be able to pop in and check out what is going on for people this week. So I always try for the parent question, I try to find questions that are coming up for people that are just common that people are trying to figure out and sort through as a parent. So if you'll just bear with me here. Let's see, here we go. I'm in that group and I'm just going to pick one of the first questions that I see. So some of these are medical questions. Somebody was asking about personal experiences with a VBAC or a second C-section. So I'm skipping that as I'm not a medical provider. I'm an early childhood educator. I have my own personal experience with that particular question, but I'm not going to pull that as the question for the week because that is a medical question that it's fine, obviously, to get other people's personal opinions, but really your medical provider is the one that's going to know a lot more about what's going on with you and which option is something that's really viable for you. So I'm skipping some of the ones that are medical because that's a line that I make sure I really articulate with families, that as an early childhood educator, there's obviously going to be some overlap in services, but where I blend into where that the questions blend into medical, I direct people to their providers, of course. So some people are asking for older questions about amusement parks for 7-year-olds and things like that. So I'm also going to skip those because my mission, the mission that I have at the Peace Program, is to support the adults who are supporting children in the most critical years of child development, which is going to be the first 6 years. So that's where I've narrowed my program down. And so I'm skipping through some of the older questions that I have here. So, my goodness, it's hard. Skipping a lot of medical questions online. I'm seeing a lot of what is this bite? Has anybody ever seen this kind of rash? Which again is a medical question that I would highly encourage you not to go to Facebook groups to ask about because you're going to get a whole lot of information that may not actually be that helpful. So, or it could be very incorrect. So here's one. Okay. So this is a question that they have. So they are looking for a table and chair. And I'm going to see in the comments if they have clarified the age of their child. And I don't see them talking about the age of their child, but I will post the question in the chat and then I will put it into the live stream. So this is the first part of the question is they say, does anyone have the Flissat IKEA desk for their child? The floor model in IKEA was really wobbly and flimsy. Was that the case? I think that's what I want for an arts and crafts table and a work area for my child. Currently in kindergarten, has outgrown the toddler table. Not sure if it's going to wobble. I love the border so things don't fall off, and I'd like it to last a few years. So kids' furniture is a great topic. I'm going to see if I can pull this image that the person offered and put it quickly into my Google slide for today, so that you can see, and maybe that'll work. This is the person's question. So let's see if I can go back into this and give you the next slide. So, oh, I see. I can reshare that stream and then it would connect maybe. Well, it's not allowing me. That's okay. So if you can imagine, this is just a pretty standard, you can look up this type of chair. It's the Flissat IKEA. So kids' furniture is really interesting, and there's an interesting story with Montessori, certainly. So Montessori was one of the first people who made kids' furniture. So when she was starting to work with children after earning her medical degree, the first thing that she noticed was the tables and chairs and benches that were being provided for children were not the right size, especially for younger children, that children's feet weren't touching the ground. Oftentimes the chairs and tables were bolted to the floor, so you weren't able to really move them or switch out a chair for something that would fit the child better. And there are implications for how well a chair and a table is fitting a person's body. There are ergonomic chairs available for adults. There's all kinds of things that people have for adults around posture, around chronic pain that comes out of sitting in a space that's not actually well suited to your body and your height. So there's all kinds of information that we have now, and Montessori was one of the first people who said, we should be thinking about this with kids." So with kids, usually and even with adults, what you want to see is you want to see a 90-degree angle for the thigh and the lower leg. So you want, when the child is seated, you want their knees to come out and then be at a 90-degree angle and touch the floor. That would be an ideal size for a child. Now, it can be really hard to get a table and chair that perfectly suits a child because they're constantly growing, which is why adjustable chairs and tables can be really, really helpful. I will say that investing in high quality furniture for the child is investing in them feeling comfortable in that workspace. So whether they're doing Legos, whether they're doing a writing project or a big art thing, it matters, just like it would matter for an adult. Like, imagining if every time you sat at a table to do a project, whether you were eating or you were doing a work project or an art project, and you had to sit at a bar stool that had no lower rung, that would be quite uncomfortable for you. Because your feet would be swinging around. You probably would be fidgeting a lot. You'd probably want to take breaks from the chair a lot. So if we think about the misalignment of the child's furniture to the actual size and shape of their body, and how that correlates to maybe kids not wanting to like sit still or stay at an activity, well, imagine if that was the situation that you were in. That would make things kind of hard for you to interact with, and you'd want to take breaks and be fidgety. So getting a high quality table and chair is really helpful. And if it feels flimsy, it probably is, which means it's not going to last as long as you'd hope. A lot of really high quality kids furniture I often have saved for birthdays. And if, I have extended family that would like to get my kids a gift, or they want to pool together on something, I would say this table and chair. And normally I wouldn't spend this much on a table and chair for a child, but it's going to last a few years because it's actually sturdy. And I tend to think that that seems like a really nice gift that they can have. There are adjustable table furniture that it will grow with the child, and then you just get a new chair that really fits the child. And so yeah, that's what I would say. I know that this family is asking specifically around having a border so things don't fall off as easily. I'd say sometimes that can make it hard if you imagine working on a table space that has a border and writing, how that can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable that your arm is resting on this sort of lipped border. So oftentimes the way that tables are designed for adults, if they do have a border, it's just a border on two sides. And often it's without a border. So I would always be thinking about, this is a tool. This has a utility to it. So it's supposed to be functional, and it's supposed to be functional for the child. So if we're trying to solve cleanup, then we might not need to solve that with the furniture. We need to solve that with the capacity of the child. And if the child isn't capable of cleaning up, then we can give them less stuff so that they are capable of it. Or we can give them, I'm thinking if the child's 16 months, roll away pens and pencils and markers. Those are going to be very hard on a table because the child is constantly going to knock those off. Whereas rock crayons are better for their pincer grasp anyway. And they're not going to roll off because they're rocks and they're oblong shaped. And so you can design the kind of things that are being provided to the child to meet what you're trying to solve for, like cleaning up, but that's not necessarily how I would pick the table and chair. I would pick the table and chair to be sturdy so that it actually does last several years, and to be picking a table and chair that's actually going to fit the child. So having the child be comfortable in their chair and to be able to have good posture in their chair is going to be really helpful to their health and development. So I think that's a great question. I'd say in terms of where Community Playthings is a furniture company that a lot of Montessori schools use. They're not cheap, but they do have really, really sturdy, high quality, ergonomic furniture. And they do have an adjustable table that I've had. I just got one table when my kids were 1 years old, and we still use it. And my kids are 8 and 5. So this will be the only table that they need until they're moving into their adolescence, when they're actually growing into the height of an adult. And then we won't need that anymore, but it will have lasted probably a decade between the two kids. And then we've gotten different chairs that actually fit their body as they grow. So that's been a great resource. But they're not inexpensive. So that's where I'd say, that was a great first birthday gift. A lot of people are really liking Sprouts furniture. I know Sprouts has a much more affordable option, and people are really seem to like them. And I'm not sure how much of an adjustable chairs and tables they have. It's possible that it's more affordable, that you might just get a second table and chair when that time comes. But there does seem to be some popularity there. And frankly, Amazon has, and other retailers have, tables and chairs. One of the things that's nice is to look up the chair and height guidelines. So you should be able to access a PDF. You certainly can get one from the Community Playthings website of the chair and table height guidelines. So based on the child's age, what height table should they be in, and therefore what height chair, so that it is the most suitable to their body is the goal. If you look there and you find a table that you really like from a retailer, and I would always try to figure out, okay, well, how high is that? And then based on the guidelines, what kind of chair would I need? And what age is that for? Because most of the table and chairs for children that you find on Amazon or other retailers are dimensioned for a preschool age child. So if you have a preschool age child, you're probably going to find quite a few options. If you have a toddler, the options are probably way too big for them. And you might feel inclined to get something that is too big for them so that they grow into it. And I would say that their most formative years of learning are the first 3 years. And so what are they learning about how to interact with a table and chair if the table and chair don't fit them? They're learning to squirm and get up and down and all over the place. That's actually a really wonderful opportunity to give them a table and chair that fit them, so that they can learn how to interact with these tools and they can use them as tools later. So that's where the adjustable ones can come in, and you can find different ones that are quite nice with the how they adjust upward. And that is the Friday Five. So thank you so much for joining me. Apologies for being a little bit late, but hopefully you enjoyed that. I will have my slides put together for next week now that I know how to do that. And I hope you join me for next week's Friday Five. See you then.